Tom Mitchell wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished fixing the broken fence post on his ranch. The Arizona sun was beating down mercilessly, and he was looking forward to a cold beer and some shade. His cattle ranch sat in a valley surrounded by red mesas and ancient Apache lands. He had inherited this place from his grandfather 5 years ago, and despite the challenges, he loved every acre of it. The ranch house was a simple wooden structure, with a wraparound porch, painted white but now weathered by the desert winds. Tom had always felt safe here, even though he lived alone, and the nearest neighbor was 20 miles away. The silence of the desert was his companion, broken only by the occasional call of a hawk or the lowing of his cattle. As he walked back toward the house, carrying his tools, something caught his eye. 2 figures were walking up the dusty road that led to his property. In this remote area, visitors were rare. Tom squinted against the bright sunlight, trying to make out who they might be. As they got closer, he realized they were 2 women, and they were walking with purpose directly toward his front door. What struck him immediately was their size. Both women were exceptionally tall, probably close to 7 feet each. They moved with a fluid grace despite their impressive height. Their long black hair flowed freely in the desert breeze, and they wore traditional Apache clothing mixed with modern elements. Colorful woven shawls draped over their shoulders, and turquoise jewelry caught the light as they approached. Tom felt his heartbeat quicken, not from fear but from curiosity, and something else he couldn't quite name. In all his years living on this ranch, he had never seen anyone like these 2 women. They carried themselves with dignity and strength, their faces serious and determined. He set down his tools on the porch steps and waited. The taller of the 2 women, who appeared to be the elder, had striking features with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. The younger one looked similar, but with a softer expression, though equally intense. Both had the weathered skin of people who spent their lives outdoors under the desert sun. As they reached his property line, Tom noticed they paused for a moment, as if seeking permission to continue. This small gesture told him they were respectful people, not troublemakers. He raised his hand in greeting and called out, "Good afternoon, ladies. Can I help you with something?" The elder sister stepped forward and spoke in accented English, her voice deep and melodious. "We are looking for Tom Mitchell. Are you him?" There was something urgent in her tone that made Tom's stomach tighten with concern. "Yes, I'm Tom Mitchell. This is my ranch." He walked down from the porch to meet them properly, though he had to crane his neck to look up at their faces. "What can I do for you?" The 2 women exchanged a meaningful glance before the elder continued. "My name is Sarah Whitefeather, and this is my sister Maria. We have traveled far to speak with you about something very important, something that concerns both you and our people." Tom's mind raced. He had always tried to be respectful of the Apache heritage in this area. His grandfather had told him stories about the original inhabitants of this land, and Tom had always felt like a temporary guardian rather than an owner. But he couldn't imagine what these women would need to discuss with him. "Of course," Tom said, gesturing toward the porch. "Would you like to come up to the house? I can offer you some water or iced tea. You must be tired from walking in this heat." Maria, the younger sister, spoke for the first time. Her voice was gentler than Sarah's but carried the same underlying strength. "That is kind of you, Mr. Mitchell. We would appreciate some water." As they climbed the porch steps, Tom couldn't help but notice how the wooden boards creaked more than usual under their weight. These women were not just tall. They were solidly built, with the kind of strength that came from a lifetime of physical work. Yet there was nothing threatening about them. If anything, they seemed almost vulnerable, as if they were carrying a heavy burden. Tom opened the front door and invited them inside. The contrast was stark as they ducked to enter through the doorframe, which suddenly seemed inadequate. In his living room, they looked even more impressive, their heads nearly touching the ceiling beams that Tom had never considered particularly low. "Please, sit wherever you're comfortable," Tom offered. Though he realized his furniture might not accommodate their size well, they chose to remain standing, which actually made conversation easier, since Tom didn't have to look up quite so much. He brought them tall glasses of ice water, which they accepted gratefully. Sarah drank deeply before setting down her glass and fixing Tom with an intense stare. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, "what we have to tell you will sound strange, but we ask that you listen with an open mind. Our grandmother, who passed away last month, left us with instructions. She told us we must come to you when the time was right." Tom felt a chill run down his spine despite the warm afternoon. "Your grandmother knew about me?" "She knew about your family, your grandfather, and the agreement that was made long ago. An agreement that was never properly fulfilled." Sarah's eyes never left his face as she spoke. The younger sister, Maria, stepped closer. "Mr. Mitchell, do you know the full history of this land? Do you know what happened here before your grandfather built this ranch?" Tom shook his head slowly. His grandfather had told him general stories about the area's Apache history, but nothing specific. Nothing that would explain why these two remarkable women had sought him out. Sarah reached into a leather pouch she carried and pulled out an old photograph, yellowed with age. She handed it to Tom, who took it with trembling fingers. The black and white image showed two men standing in front of what looked like the foundation of his current house. One man was clearly his grandfather as a young person. The other was a Native American man in traditional dress. Between them stood two incredibly tall women who looked remarkably like Sarah and Maria. "That," Sarah said quietly, "is our great-grandmother and our grandmother. The man with your grandfather is our great-grandfather. This picture was taken the day they made their agreement." Tom stared at the photograph, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The resemblance between the women in the old photo and his current visitors was uncanny. But that was impossible. The photo looked like it was taken decades ago. "I don't understand," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria stepped forward, her expression compassionate but serious. "Mr. Mitchell, there are things about this land, about our family, and about yours that go beyond ordinary understanding. Our people have been the guardians of something precious for generations, something that your grandfather promised to help, protect." Sarah nodded gravely. "The time has come for that promise to be fulfilled. But first, you must understand what you have unknowingly been living above all these years." Tom's hands shook as he set the photograph down on his coffee table. The room suddenly felt smaller with these two towering women standing in it, and the weight of their words hung in the air like smoke. He had lived on this ranch for 5 years, walked every inch of it, and never suspected there was anything unusual about the land beneath his feet. "What do you mean, living above something?" Tom asked, his voice hoarse with confusion and growing concern. Sarah moved to the window and gazed out at the vast expanse of desert that stretched beyond the ranch buildings. Her imposing figure cast a long shadow across the wooden floor. "Mr. Mitchell, this valley holds one of the most sacred sites of our people. For over 300 years, my family has been chosen as guardians of what lies beneath this ground." Maria joined her sister at the window, and Tom noticed how they seemed to move in perfect synchronization, as if they shared an invisible connection. "Our great-grandmother and grandmother were the guardians before us. They were women of unusual size and strength, just as we are. This is not coincidence, Mr. Mitchell. We are chosen specifically for this purpose." Tom sank into his leather armchair, trying to process what he was hearing. "But my grandfather bought this land legally. He showed me all the papers, the deed. Everything was legitimate." "Yes," Sarah said, turning back to face him. "He did purchase it legally. But what he also did was make a sacred promise to our great-grandfather. He swore that when the time came, he would help us protect what must never be disturbed." The younger sister pulled out a worn leather journal from her bag and handed it to Tom. "This belonged to your grandfather. Our grandmother kept it safe, all these years, waiting for the right moment to return it." Tom opened the journal with trembling fingers. His grandfather's familiar handwriting filled the pages, but these weren't the ranch records or daily notes Tom remembered seeing. These entries were different, filled with references to the sacred trust, the underground chambers, and promises to the Whitefeather family. One entry, dated 50 years ago, made Tom's blood run cold. "Today I met with Chief Whitefeather and his daughters, Sarah and Maria. They are unlike any people I have ever encountered. Their size and strength seem almost supernatural, but their purpose is sacred. They have shown me what lies beneath the eastern pasture. I understand now why this land called to me. I am not just a rancher here. I am a guardian." Tom looked up at the two women with new understanding and growing amazement. "You're the same Sarah and Maria mentioned in this journal? But this was written 50 years ago. That's impossible." The sisters exchanged another meaningful glance. Sarah's expression was patient but serious. "Mr. Mitchell, there are many things in this world that cannot be explained by ordinary reasoning. My sister and I age differently than most people. It is part of what makes us suitable guardians. We have watched over this sacred place for longer than you might believe possible." Maria moved closer to Tom's chair. Despite her intimidating size, her presence was comforting rather than threatening. "Your grandfather understood that some responsibilities pass from one generation to the next. He knew that someday you would inherit not just this ranch, but the obligation that comes with it." Tom flipped through more pages of the journal, finding detailed maps and drawings. One sketch showed an underground chamber system that appeared to extend beneath his entire property. Another page contained symbols he had never seen before, along with his grandfather's notes about protection rituals and monthly ceremonies. "What exactly is down there?" Tom asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Sarah walked to the center of the room, her head nearly touching the ceiling beam. "Beneath your eastern pasture lies a natural cave system that our people have considered sacred for over 1,000 years. But it is more than just caves, Mr. Mitchell. It is a burial ground of our ancestors, and it contains artifacts and remains that must never be disturbed." 3 months ago, Maria continued, mining surveyors were spotted near the boundary of your property. They were taking soil samples and measuring the land. We believe they are preparing to make you an offer for mineral rights. Tom's stomach dropped. He had indeed received several calls from mining companies in recent weeks, but he had dismissed them without much thought. Now he understood why these calls had suddenly increased. The mining companies have new technology, Sarah explained. They can detect metal deposits and valuable minerals much deeper than before. What they don't understand is that the metals they detect are not natural ore deposits. They are sacred objects, tools, and ornaments buried with our ancestors' centuries ago. Maria pulled out a modern tablet computer which looked almost comically small in her large hands. She showed Tom satellite images of his property with areas marked in red. These are the locations where ground-penetrating radar shows anomalies. The mining companies think they found silver and copper deposits. What they've actually found are the burial chambers of Apache chiefs and warriors. Tom stood up and began pacing, his mind racing. So you're telling me that my entire ranch sits on top of a sacred burial ground, and now mining companies want to dig it up? Not your entire ranch, Sarah clarified, but significant portions of it, yes. The eastern pasture, where you graze most of your cattle, sits directly above the main chamber complex. If mining operations begin there, centuries of our ancestors' remains will be desecrated. The weight of responsibility settled on Tom's shoulders like a heavy blanket. He thought about his grandfather, a man he had always respected for his integrity and fairness. Now he understood that his grandfather had carried this burden for decades, protecting sacred Apache land while building his own life around that responsibility. What did my grandfather do to protect the site? Tom asked, sitting back down with the journal. Maria smiled for the first time since arriving, transforming her serious face into something warm and beautiful. He was a good man, your grandfather. Every month he would meet with our grandmother at the sacred site. She would perform traditional ceremonies to honor the ancestors, and he would ensure that no one disturbed the land. When cattle grazed too close to certain areas, he would move them. When curious visitors asked too many questions about the landscape, he would redirect their attention. He also, Sarah added, made sure that when the time came, his heir would understand the full responsibility. That is why we have this journal, these maps, and the photographs. He documented everything so that you would be prepared. Tom looked out the window at the eastern pasture, where his prize cattle were currently grazing peacefully in the afternoon sun. The land looked ordinary, just rolling grassland dotted with mesquite trees and the occasional cactus. It was hard to believe that beneath that peaceful scene lay chambers filled with the remains of Apache warriors and chiefs. "But you said the time has come," Tom said, turning back to the sisters. "What's changed? Why now?" Sarah's expression grew grave. "Because tomorrow morning, representatives from Southwestern Mining Corporation are coming to make you an offer you might find very difficult to refuse. They are prepared to pay you $10 million for mineral rights to your eastern pasture." The number hit Tom like a physical blow. $10 million would solve every financial problem he had ever faced. He could pay off the ranch mortgage, upgrade all his equipment, and still have enough left over to live comfortably for the rest of his life. Maria seemed to read his thoughts. "It is a great deal of money, Mr. Mitchell. We understand the temptation, but we also know that you are your grandfather's grandson. We believe you will make the same choice he would have made." Tom set the journal down and looked at both women. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah and Maria stood motionless, their dark eyes fixed on Tom with an intensity that made him feel as if his very soul was being measured. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the room and highlighting the remarkable presence of these two extraordinary women. Sarah stepped forward, her movements deliberate and graceful, despite her imposing size. "We are asking you to honor the promise your grandfather made, to refuse the mining company's offer and to help us protect our ancestors' resting place. But first, we believe you should see what you would be protecting." Tom's practical mind warred with his growing sense of obligation. $10 million was more money than he had ever dreamed of having. It would transform his life completely. But looking at these two women, seeing the photographs of his grandfather with their family, reading his grandfather's own words about sacred trusts and promises, Tom felt the weight of history pressing down on him. "You want to show me the burial chambers?" Tom asked. Maria nodded. "It is time. Our grandmother always said that when the moment came to choose, the guardian would need to see with their own eyes what they were protecting. Only then could they make a decision with full understanding." Tom glanced at his watch. It was nearly 4 o'clock, and the desert heat was starting to break. "How far is it?" "A 20-minute walk across your eastern pasture," Sarah replied. "But Mr. Mitchell, what you are about to see must remain secret. This knowledge has been shared with only a handful of people over the centuries. Your grandfather was one of them. Now we offer you the same trust." The seriousness of their tone made Tom's decision for him. "Show me." The three of them left the house and walked across Tom's property toward the eastern pasture. As they walked, Tom became acutely aware of how the sisters moved across the landscape. Their feet seemed to know exactly where to step, as if they were following an invisible path that had been walked countless times before. They avoided certain areas entirely, steering around patches of ground that looked identical to everywhere else. "How long have you two been guardians?" Tom asked as they walked. "We were chosen when we were teenagers," Maria replied. "Our unusual size marked us as potential guardians, but we had to prove ourselves worthy through years of training and ceremony. We learned the old ways, the sacred songs, the protection rituals." Sarah added, "Being a guardian is not just about size and strength, though those help. It is about understanding the responsibility to preserve something precious for future generations. It is about putting the sacred above the profitable." As they approached the eastern pasture, Tom noticed his cattle were clustered in one area, avoiding a section near a small rise in the ground. He had always wondered why they did that, assuming it was just one of those unexplainable animal behaviors. "They sense it," Maria said, noticing his observation. "Animals are more sensitive to sacred energy than humans. Your cattle instinctively avoid the burial areas." When they reached the rise, Sarah knelt down and began brushing away dirt and grass from what Tom had always thought was just a natural rock formation. As she worked, Tom realized it wasn't natural at all. Carefully carved stones emerged from beneath the earth, fitted together with the precision of master craftsmen. "This is one of the entrances," Sarah explained. "There are 3 others, but this is the main one." Our people sealed these chambers centuries ago to protect them from Spanish conquistadors and later from American settlers. Maria produced a small leather bag from her clothing and sprinkled what looked like cornmeal and herbs around the stone entrance while speaking in a language Tom didn't recognize. Her voice rose and fell in a rhythmic chant that seemed to harmonize with the desert wind. "She is asking permission from our ancestors," Sarah explained quietly. "We never enter the sacred chambers without proper ceremony." When Maria finished her chant, both sisters worked together to move the stone covering. Despite their impressive size and obvious strength, they handled the ancient stones with reverence and care. A dark opening appeared, just large enough for a person to enter. Sarah pulled out 3 flashlights from a bag Tom hadn't noticed her carrying. "The chambers are stable and safe. Our ancestors built them to last. But stay close to us and touch nothing without permission." Tom's heart pounded as he followed Sarah into the opening, with Maria bringing up the rear. The entrance tunnel was narrow at first, forcing all 3 of them to move in single file. Tom was amazed that the sisters could navigate the space at all, given their height, but they moved with practiced ease. After about 50 feet, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. Tom's flashlight beam swept across walls covered in pictographs and symbols painted in red, black, and white. The artwork was incredibly preserved, as vivid as if it had been painted yesterday rather than centuries ago. "The dry desert air keeps everything intact," Maria explained, seeing his amazement. "These paintings tell the story of our people, our migrations, our great battles and victories." But it was what occupied the center of the chamber that took Tom's breath away. Arranged in perfect rows were dozens of burial platforms, each containing the remains of Apache warriors, chiefs, and important tribal members. The bodies were wrapped in beautiful woven blankets and surrounded by weapons, pottery, jewelry, and other precious items. "This is just the first chamber," Sarah said softly. "There are 6 more, each containing different generations of our people. Some burials date back over 800 years. Tom moved slowly through the chamber, his flashlight revealing incredible details. Copper bracelets and silver ornaments gleamed in the artificial light. Weapons with intricate carvings lay beside their owners. Pottery decorated with stunning geometric patterns sat at the heads of burial platforms. "This is what the mining companies detected," Maria said, gesturing to the metal objects. "They think they have found natural ore deposits, but what they have actually found is the treasure of our ancestors, buried with them to honor their achievements in life." In one corner of the chamber, Tom's light fell on something that made him gasp. A burial platform larger than the others held the remains of what must have been an extraordinarily tall person, even by the standards of Sarah and Maria. The skeleton was easily 7.5 feet long, and the burial goods surrounding it were more elaborate than any others in the chamber. "Our great-great-grandmother," Sarah said, following his gaze. "She was the first of our family to be chosen as a guardian. Legend says she could communicate with the spirits of the ancestors and that her strength was unmatched by any warrior." Tom spent the next hour touring the underground complex. Each chamber revealed new wonders and deepened his understanding of the sacred responsibility his grandfather had accepted. The sisters showed him rooms filled with ceremonial objects, chambers where important tribal meetings had been held, and galleries of rock art that documented Apache history going back centuries. In the deepest chamber, Maria showed him something that made his decision crystal clear. On one wall was a painting that clearly depicted tall Apache women standing beside white settlers. The scene showed both groups working together, hands clasped in friendship and mutual respect. "This painting was created after your grandfather made his promise," Maria explained. "Our grandmother painted it to commemorate the alliance between our families. It shows that protection of sacred places requires cooperation between all people who respect the land." When they finally emerged from the underground complex, the sun was setting, painting the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Tom stood in the evening air, trying to process everything he had seen. The burial chambers weren't just archaeological sites. They were living connections to Apache culture and history. The thought of mining equipment tearing through those sacred spaces, disturbing centuries of careful preservation, Made him physically sick. Now you understand, Sarah said, carefully replacing the stone covering over the entrance. This is what $10 million would destroy. Tom nodded slowly. His decision was made, but he knew the challenges were just beginning. The mining company representatives are coming tomorrow morning. What do I tell them? Maria smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. You tell them the same thing your grandfather would have told them. The land is not for sale. The next morning arrived with an intensity that made Tom's coffee taste bitter, and his hands shake slightly, as he prepared for what would likely be the most important meeting of his life. He had barely slept, spending most of the night reading through his grandfather's journal and thinking about the incredible chambers beneath his land. At precisely 9 o'clock, a black SUV pulled up the dusty road to his ranch house. Tom watched from his porch as 3 men in expensive suits climbed out, looking completely out of place in the desert landscape. They carried briefcases and tablets, and even from a distance, Tom could see the confident swagger of people accustomed to getting their way. The lead man was tall and lean with silver hair and a predatory smile. He introduced himself as Richard Hawthorne, Vice President of Land Acquisition for Southwestern Mining Corporation. His companions were a lawyer named Stevens and a geologist named Dr. Martinez. Mr. Mitchell, Hawthorne said, extending a manicured hand. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. I think you're going to be very pleased with what we have to offer. Tom shook hands politely but didn't invite them inside. Something about these men made him want to keep the meeting on the porch, in the open air where the sacred land could witness what was said. I understand you're interested in mineral rights to my eastern pasture, Tom said, getting straight to the point. Hawthorne's smile widened. Indeed we are. Our preliminary surveys indicate significant copper and silver deposits beneath your grazing land. We're prepared to make you an extremely generous offer. Dr. Martinez opened his tablet and showed Tom detailed geological surveys and 3D models of the underground mineral deposits. The images were sophisticated and convincing, showing exactly where the Apache burial chambers were located, though the mining company obviously didn't know what they were actually looking at. As you can see, Dr. Martinez explained, the deposits are substantial and relatively shallow. We estimate approximately $40 million worth of extractable metals. Stevens, the lawyer, opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick contract. We're prepared to offer you $10 million up front for exclusive mining rights to the eastern section of your property. You would retain ownership of the land surface and could continue ranching operations around our mining activities. Tom felt the weight of the moment. $10 million sat on the table in front of him, represented by legal documents and corporate promises, but in his mind, he could see the painted walls of the burial chambers, the carefully preserved remains of Apache ancestors, and the trust in Sarah and Maria's eyes. That's a substantial amount of money, Tom said carefully. It certainly is, Hawthorne agreed. More money than most people see in a lifetime, and this is just the beginning. If the deposits prove as rich as we expect, there could be additional bonuses and royalty payments. Tom picked up the contract and pretended to study it, buying time to choose his words carefully. Can you tell me exactly what the mining process would involve? Dr. Martinez lit up with enthusiasm. We would use a combination of open-pit mining and underground extraction. The process involves removing the topsoil and rock layers to access the ore deposits. We estimate we would need to excavate to a depth of approximately 60 feet across, a 200-acre area. The casual way he described destroying the burial chambers made Tom's stomach clench. These men had no idea they were planning to desecrate one of the most sacred Apache sites in Arizona. 60 feet deep, Tom repeated. That would disturb quite a bit of ground. Yes, but don't worry about the environmental impact, Stevens assured him. We have all the necessary permits and environmental assessments. When we're finished, we'll restore the land to its original condition. Tom almost laughed at the impossibility of that promise. There was no way to restore 800-year-old burial chambers once they had been torn apart by mining equipment. Gentlemen, Tom said, setting down the contract, I appreciate you coming out here and making this offer. $10 million is indeed a life-changing amount of money. Hawthorne leaned forward eagerly. Then you're ready to move forward? We can have the papers signed today and get you a check within the week. However, Tom continued, I'm afraid I can't accept your offer. The silence that followed was deafening. All three men stared at Tom as if he had spoken in a foreign language. Hawthorne was the first to recover. I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell. Did you say you can't accept? Perhaps you didn't understand the full scope of our offer. I understood perfectly, Tom said firmly. The eastern pasture is not available for mining operations. Dr. Martinez jumped in. Mr. Mitchell, perhaps you need time to think about this. $10 million is an enormous sum. You could buy several ranches this size with that money. Or maybe you're holding out for more, Stephen suggested with a knowing smile. We might be able to negotiate upward, perhaps $12 million. Tom shook his head. It's not about the money, gentlemen. That land is not for sale for any amount. Hawthorne's friendly demeanor began to crack. Mr. Mitchell, I don't think you understand the situation here. We've done extensive geological surveys. We know exactly what's under your land. If you refuse to work with us, there are other options. The threat was subtle but clear. Tom felt his grandfather's strength flowing through him. What kind of other options? Eminent domain, for one, Stephen said smoothly. The state has significant interest in developing mineral resources. If we can demonstrate that your refusal to allow mining is contrary to the public good, there are legal avenues we can pursue. Additionally, Hawthorne added, we've identified similar deposits on the federal land adjacent to your property. If we establish mining operations there, the noise, dust, and heavy equipment traffic might make your ranching operations very difficult to continue. Tom stood up, his decision crystallized by their threats. Gentlemen, I think this meeting is over. Don't be hasty, Mr. Mitchell, Dr. Martinez pleaded. At least take our cards, think about it for a few days. Call us when you've had time to consider what you're turning down. As the three men gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Hawthorne made one final attempt. Mr. Mitchell, I've been in this business for 20 years. I've seen stubborn landowners before. They always think they can hold out for more money or find some other way to develop their land. But the reality is, you're sitting on a gold mine here. If you don't work with us, someone else will find a way to get those minerals. At least with our offer, you get rich in the process. Tom watched as their SUV disappeared down the dusty road, leaving a cloud of dust that settled slowly in the still morning air. The silence that followed felt sacred, as if the land itself was sighing with relief. He walked to the eastern pasture, where his cattle were grazing peacefully, carefully avoiding the area above the burial chambers, just as they always did. Standing on the small rise that concealed the entrance to the sacred site, Tom pulled out his cell phone and called the number Sarah had given him. It's done, he said when she answered. I turned down their offer. There was a moment of silence before Sarah responded, and Tom could hear the relief in her voice. You made the right choice, Mr. Mitchell. Your grandfather would be proud. They threatened eminent domain and said they might start mining the federal land next to my property, Tom said. This isn't over. No, Sarah agreed. It's not over. But now the real work begins. Maria and I have been preparing for this possibility. There are ways to protect the sacred site permanently, but it will require trust and cooperation between all of us. That afternoon, Sarah and Maria returned to the ranch, this time carrying large bags and what appeared to be camping equipment. Tom met them at the porch, curious about their preparations. We're going to stay here for a while, Maria explained. If the mining company is serious about pursuing other options, they may try to begin unauthorized surveys or even attempt to access the burial chambers directly, Sarah added. Our family has been preparing for this possibility for decades. We have legal resources, political connections, and documentation that can help protect this site permanently. But it will require a coordinated effort. Tom looked at these two remarkable women who had entered his life and completely changed his understanding of his own land and responsibilities. What do you need me to do? Maria smiled. First, we need you to help us contact every environmental group, Native American rights organization, and historical preservation society in the region. The mining company may have legal resources, but we have something more powerful. What's that? Tom asked. Sarah's eyes gleamed with determination. The truth. Over the next 2 weeks, Tom's quiet ranch transformed into a bustling center of activity. Sarah and Maria had set up a command post in his living room, complete with laptops, phones, and stacks of legal documents. The sisters worked with an efficiency that amazed Tom, making calls, sending emails, and coordinating with organizations across the country. The first breakthrough came when Maria connected with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a prominent archaeologist from the University of Arizona, who specialized in Apache culture. When Maria described the burial chambers, Dr. Rodriguez immediately understood the significance and agreed to drive out to the ranch the next day. Dr. Rodriguez was a small, energetic woman in her 50s who seemed dwarfed by Sarah and Maria, but her expertise commanded immediate respect. When the sisters showed her the underground chambers, her reaction was everything they had hoped for. "This is extraordinary," she whispered as they toured the burial complex. "These chambers are better preserved than anything I've seen in 30 years of archaeological work. The artwork alone represents an invaluable record of Apache history." In the main burial chamber, Dr. Rodriguez carefully photographed the pictographs and burial platforms, documenting everything with scientific precision. "Mr. Mitchell, you're sitting on one of the most significant Apache archaeological sites in the Southwest. This absolutely must be preserved." When they emerged from the chambers, Dr. Rodriguez was already making calls to colleagues, the State Historic Preservation Office, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. "I can have a team here within a week to begin proper documentation," she told them. "Once this site is officially recognized and documented, it will be nearly impossible for any mining company to disturb it." Sarah and Maria exchanged satisfied glances. This was exactly what they had been hoping for. Meanwhile, Tom discovered that the sisters had connections he never would have expected. Maria had studied law at Arizona State University before dedicating herself to her guardian duties, and she had maintained relationships with several prominent Native American rights attorneys. Sarah had worked with environmental organizations for years, building a network of allies who were always ready to fight against destructive mining operations. Within days, Tom's ranch was receiving visits from representatives of the Sierra Club, the National Congress of American Indians, the Archaeological Institute of America, and several other organizations. Each group brought expertise, resources, and legal strategies to protect the sacred site. The most impressive visitor was Robert Crow Feather, a prominent Apache tribal leader and attorney who had successfully fought similar battles across the Southwest. When he met Sarah and Maria, there was an immediate recognition between them that went beyond words. He listened carefully as they explained the situation, occasionally asking questions in Apache that the sisters answered with obvious respect. "This mining company has made a serious mistake," Robert said after touring the burial chambers. "They're not just fighting one rancher anymore, they're fighting the entire Apache nation, and we have legal precedents on our side." He explained that recent federal legislation had strengthened protections for Native American sacred sites, especially burial grounds. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act gives us significant legal power here. Once we can prove this is a legitimate burial site, which Dr. Rodriguez's documentation will do, any disturbance becomes a federal crime. But the mining company wasn't giving up without a fight. Richard Hawthorne returned to the ranch 3 days later, this time with a larger team that included additional lawyers and what appeared to be private security personnel. Tom met them at the gate to his property, refusing to let them drive up to the house. "Mr. Mitchell," Hawthorne said, his earlier friendliness completely gone, "you're making a serious mistake. We've filed preliminary paperwork for eminent domain proceedings. The state is very interested in the mineral wealth beneath your land." Tom stood his ground, though his heart was racing. Behind him, he could see Sarah and Maria emerging from the house, their imposing figures clearly visible even at a distance. "My land isn't for sale, Mr. Hawthorne. Not to you, not to the state, not to anyone." "Look around you, Mitchell," one of the new lawyers said. "You're just one man with a small ranch. We represent a major corporation with unlimited legal resources. How long do you think you can fight us?" Before Tom could answer, Sarah and Maria reached the gate. The effect of their presence on the mining company representatives was immediate and dramatic. The men who had been speaking confidently suddenly seemed unsure of themselves, physically backing away from the gate as the sisters approached. "Gentlemen," Sarah said in her deep, authoritative voice, "you are trespassing on private property. Mr. Mitchell has asked you to leave." Hawthorne tried to regain his composure. "We have legal rights to be here. Our geological surveys were conducted from public land, and we have documentation proving the mineral deposits." Maria stepped forward, and even through the gate her presence was intimidating. "What you have, Mr. Hawthorne, is incomplete information. What you think are mineral deposits are actually sacred burial sites protected by federal law. Any attempt to disturb them will result in federal charges." Dr. Martinez, the geologist, looked confused. "Burial sites? Our surveys show clear metallic signatures consistent with copper and silver ore. Your surveys show metal objects buried with Apache warriors and chiefs," Tom said, finding his confidence with the sisters beside him. "Weapons, jewelry, and ceremonial items that have been in the ground for centuries." The mining company team huddled together for a whispered conference. Tom could see Hawthorne becoming increasingly agitated as his colleagues explained the legal implications of what they had just learned. Finally, Hawthorne stepped forward again, his face red with anger. "This isn't over, Mitchell. We've invested too much in this project to walk away now. If you won't sell and if the burial site story is legitimate, then we'll find another way." "What kind of other way?" Sarah asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "The federal land adjacent to your property contains similar deposits," Hawthorne said. "We can establish our mining operation there and expand gradually. Eventually, we'll find a way to access what's under your land." After the mining company representatives left, Tom, Sarah, and Maria held an emergency strategy session with Robert Crowfeather and Dr. Rodriguez via video call. The threat to mine the adjacent federal land was serious, as it could potentially damage the burial chambers through vibration and groundwater disruption. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Robert said. "I'm going to contact Senator Martinez's office immediately. She chairs the Senate Subcommittee on Indian Affairs and has been looking for a high-profile case to demonstrate the effectiveness of the new sacred site protection laws." Dr. Rodriguez added, "I can have my full archaeological team here by tomorrow. If we can complete the documentation and get the site officially listed on the National Register of Historic Places within the next 2 weeks, it will create a protective buffer zone that extends beyond Tom's property boundaries." That evening, as the sun set over the desert, Tom sat on his porch with Sarah and Maria, watching the peaceful scene that belied the legal and political battle brewing around them. The sisters had changed into more casual clothes, and for the first time since he had met them, they seemed relaxed. "I have to ask," Tom said, "how did you know all of this would happen? How were you so prepared?" Maria smiled. "Our grandmother saw it coming years ago. She said the time would come when the sacred sites would be threatened by modern greed, and that we would need to be ready to fight with modern weapons." "Legal weapons," Sarah clarified. "Education, documentation, political connections, and public opinion. Our ancestors fought with bows and arrows. We fight with lawyers and archaeologists." Tom laughed, despite the stress of the situation. "My grandfather would never have imagined his ranch becoming the center of a federal case." "Your grandfather knew exactly what he was getting into," Maria said gently. "The journal you showed us contains contingency plans for exactly this situation. He and our grandmother spent years preparing for the day when the sacred site would need active protection." As if on cue, Tom's phone rang. The caller ID showed a Washington, D.C. number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Mitchell?" The voice was crisp and professional. "This is Jennifer Walsh from Senator Martinez's office. The senator would like to schedule a site visit to your ranch. She's very interested in the sacred burial site and the mining company's threats. Would tomorrow afternoon be convenient?" Tom looked at Sarah and Maria, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes," he said. "Tomorrow afternoon would be fine." When he hung up, Sarah was smiling broadly. "And so it begins," she said. "Tomorrow, this story goes national." Senator Carmen Martinez arrived at Tom's ranch in a convoy that included her staff, several federal officials, and a news crew from a major television network. The sight of the powerful senator, a small but commanding woman in her 60s, standing Beside the towering figures of Sarah and Maria created an image that would soon appear on news broadcasts across the country. Dr. Rodriguez had worked through the night to prepare a comprehensive presentation about the burial chambers. She had created detailed maps, photographs, and historical documentation that demonstrated the site's incredible significance to Apache culture and American history. "Senator," Dr. Rodriguez explained as they stood near the entrance to the burial complex, "what we have here is essentially an intact Apache time capsule spanning 8 centuries. The preservation is so remarkable that we can read the pictographs as clearly as if they were painted yesterday." When the senator and her entourage toured the underground chambers, the impact was immediate and profound. Senator Martinez, who was herself of Native American heritage, stood in reverent silence before the ancient burial platforms, her eyes filling with tears as she absorbed the magnitude of what she was seeing. "This is beyond anything I could have imagined," she said softly. "Mr. Mitchell, you and these remarkable women are protecting not just Apache heritage but American heritage. This site belongs in the same category as Mesa Verde or Canyon de Chelly. The news crew captured everything, and by evening, the story of Tom's ranch and the giant Apache sisters was trending on social media. The visual impact of Sarah and Maria, standing protectively over the sacred site, combined with the dramatic underground footage of the burial chambers, created a compelling narrative that captured public imagination. Within 48 hours, the story had gone viral. Environmental groups, Native American organizations, and historical preservation societies rallied to support the protection effort. Donations poured in to fund legal battles, and thousands of people called their representatives demanding federal protection for the site. The mining company found themselves facing a public relations nightmare. Southwestern Mining Corporation's stock price dropped as investors worried about the negative publicity surrounding their attempt to destroy sacred burial sites. Protesters gathered outside their corporate headquarters carrying signs that read, "Respect the ancestors and sacred sites are not for sale." Richard Hawthorne made one final desperate attempt to salvage the mining project. He arranged a meeting with Tom, but this time he came alone, without his team of lawyers and intimidating companions. "Mitchell," he said, sitting across from Tom, in the ranch house kitchen while Sarah and Maria stood nearby like protective sentinels, "let's be reasonable here. All this publicity, all these outside groups, they're just going to make your life complicated. Work with us and we can find a way to mine around the burial site. Maybe we can even set up some kind of memorial or museum." Tom looked at the man, who had threatened him just weeks earlier, noting how different Hawthorne seemed now that he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "Mr. Hawthorne, there is no around the burial site. The chamber complex extends throughout the entire eastern section of my property. Any mining operation would destroy it. Plus," Maria added, "the federal investigation is already underway. The FBI has opened a case regarding potential violations of the Native American Graves Protection Act. Your company is already in serious legal trouble." Hawthorne's face flushed red. "You people have no idea what you've cost my company. We've invested millions in this project. Our shareholders are demanding answers." Sarah stepped forward, her imposing presence filling the kitchen. "Mr. Hawthorne, your company made the choice to pursue mineral rights without proper research into the cultural significance of the land. That was a business decision, and like all business decisions, it carries risks." 3 months later, Tom stood on his porch watching a very different kind of convoy approach his ranch. This time, the vehicles carried officials from the National Park Service, representatives from the Apache Nation, and Senator Martinez returning for the official designation ceremony. The burial site had been granted emergency protection under federal law, and the entire eastern section of Tom's ranch was being incorporated into a new National Historic Landmark. Tom would retain ownership of his land, but the sacred burial complex would be protected forever under federal oversight. Dr. Rodriguez had completed her archaeological documentation, and the site was being hailed as one of the most significant Apache discoveries in modern times. A small, respectful visitor center was being planned that would allow people to learn about Apache culture without disturbing the actual burial chambers. Sarah and Maria had been appointed as the official cultural liaisons for the site, ensuring that any research or educational activities would be conducted according to Apache traditions and values. They had also received a federal grant to establish a training program for other Native American communities facing similar threats to their sacred sites. The mining company had quietly withdrawn their claims and was facing multiple federal investigations. Richard Hawthorne had been fired, and Southwestern Mining Corporation was restructuring under new leadership that promised to conduct more thorough cultural and environmental assessments before pursuing future projects. As the official ceremony began, Tom found himself standing between Sarah and Maria, surrounded by dignitaries, tribal leaders, and media representatives from around the world. Senator Martinez spoke about the importance of protecting sacred sites and honoring the promises made to Native American communities. Today, the senator said, we celebrate not just the preservation of an archaeological treasure, but the triumph of cooperation between all Americans who respect the land and its history. Tom Mitchell could have accepted $10 million and walked away a rich man. Instead, he chose to honor his grandfather's promise and protect something priceless. When it came time for Tom to speak, he looked out at the crowd and then back at Sarah and Maria, who smiled encouragingly. 3 months ago, Tom began, I thought I was just a rancher trying to make a living on land my grandfather left me. I had no idea I was actually a guardian of one of the most sacred Apache sites in Arizona. When Sarah and Maria knocked on my door, they didn't just tell me about my responsibilities. They showed me that some things are more valuable than money, and that true wealth comes from preserving something precious for future generations. He paused, looking out at the eastern pasture where his cattle still grazed peacefully, still, instinctively avoiding the areas above the burial chambers. My grandfather made a promise 50 years ago, and today we've fulfilled that promise. But more than that, we've created a new promise. This sacred site will be protected not just for this generation, but for all the generations to come. As the ceremony concluded and the crowds began to disperse, Tom walked with Sarah and Maria to the small rise that concealed the main entrance to the burial chambers. The sisters performed a traditional blessing ceremony, thanking their ancestors for guiding them through the protection of the sacred site. You know, Tom said as they stood together in the desert twilight, I never did ask you the most obvious question. What's that? Maria asked. How old are you two, really? Sarah and Maria exchanged their characteristic glance and smiled mysteriously. Old enough to remember when your grandfather was a young man, Sarah said. Young enough to continue our duties? For many years to come. Some questions, Maria added with a gentle laugh, are better left unanswered. What matters is that the sacred site is safe, the ancestors are at peace, and the promise has been kept. Tom nodded, understanding that some mysteries were part of the magic. As the three of them walked back toward the ranch house, he realized that his life had been forever changed by the day 2 giant Apache sisters knocked on his door. He had lost the opportunity to become a millionaire, but he had gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that he was part of a sacred trust that connected past, present, and future. The desert wind carried the sound of ancient songs, and Tom knew his grandfather would be proud.